Welcome, everybody. I'm Mark Peter Davis, managing partner of Interplay. I'm on a mission to help entrepreneurs advance society, and this podcast is definitively part of that effort. Today, I'm very excited to present to you a conversation with Major General Julian Cheater. He's a Major General in the U.S. Air Force. His call sign is Ghost, so you'll hear me refer to him as that. That's his preferred name. He's a terrific guy and has a very senior role in the U.S. military leadership. It's an interesting convo. I mean, the whole conversation is really anchored, obviously, because of my background and interest towards a technology lens, how warfare is evolving as technology changes, the relationship between the military and the private sector, what private sector individuals and companies should be doing and or thinking about in order to help. We talk about the different types of asset relevance, and I start to peek into the future a little bit about how some of the future tech items that everyone knows are on our frontier now, AI robotics in a real material way, are starting to play into their headspace, and they are. It's an interesting conversation. I think you'll enjoy it. Major General Julian Cheater, aka call sign Ghost. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Mark. It's great seeing you back in New York City, and I know it took a while to align the schedules, but thanks for making this happen. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this will be fun, I think, hopefully for both of us. I think,
Absolutely.
It's a nice, there's this interesting merger between private and public military that needs to happen for the machine to work if you study some history. So,
Absolutely.
I think the private sector is on the catch up right now. So hopefully this will be helpful to folks. All right, I want to jump right in. So I'm a history nerd. I don't know if we've talked too much about that yet. I don't know if you've ever listened to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, but if you haven't, there's an official plug. We'll put it in the show notes. One of the best pieces of long form history content out there. I'm sure there's inaccuracies. He says that, but the narrative concept of bringing the moments to life, not the facts and dates, it's real storytelling. One of the stories that he said a long time ago in one of his earlier episodes was about World War I, actually, that landed with me, is there was a moment when the French military at the beginning of the war was riding on horseback, wearing bronze armor into German machine gun fire. And we know how that ended, but Dan brilliantly calls this an estuary, like a meeting of different technological paradigms, right? A moment where one country has taken a step function up in innovation, another one's behind, and it plays out in the battlefield, and it's you better adapt pretty quickly kind of moment.
Absolutely.
So we know that technology is like mission critical for military. I think that's pretty self-explanatory.
It is, yeah.
Layering in what Ray Kurzweil talks about, the idea of exponential change, the rate of technology change is only getting faster. Yes. So it's critical. Absolutely. And it's a rapidly moving target. So how, you've been in the military function for a long time.
Yeah.
Where technology is changing faster than it was a year ago. How does the military navigate that?
Absolutely. Great question. So, there's a great air power theorist, since you're a history buff, Italian Air Marshal Julio de Haze. And in his book, Command of the Air, he states that, victory anticipates or smiles upon those who anticipate the changes in a war, not upon those who wait to adapt themselves until after those changes occur. And so really for military leaders, it's about how do we anticipate, how do we look to the future, how do we incorporate and adapt those technologies that are in the future. So in your example there, clearly, the French in that particular case, did not adapt to the evolving nature or evolving character of warfare. And so, we see that playing out in many cases and to this day. So for us as kind of senior military members, I think it's critical to first of all kind of anticipate, what does the next conflict look like in order to deter that conflict if possible. And if we're unable to deter it, then to win. But then also to kind of map out those friction points, right? What's keeping us from adopting those technologies? In some cases, it's cost. In other cases, that technology is not mature. In some cases, it's a cultural bias or maybe a lack of knowledge. So really
Mm.
overcoming those friction points and then quickly adapting. But ultimately, war is a human endeavor. So technology will help us, but it's the will to fight and
Mm.
the training that goes along with that, the exercising our partners and allies. So there's so much more, but technology is a critical component to that. And I can certainly, there's many examples. Just recently, F-35s from out of the United Kingdom, U.S. F-35s at a Lakenheath landed on a highway in Finland. So they're adapting modern stealth technology to more, a contested environment. So how do we
Mm.
disperse our forces if we were to engage in a large scale conflict? Young airmen are training so that they perform multiple functions. So this is not necessarily technology, but they should be able to refuel, be communications experts, and accomplish multiple functions so that we're in a, contested environment. We need to maintain a small footprint. How do we do that? Many examples of these adaptations of technology.
Was the point about landing on a highway a practice drill where they're like now able to take on and off out of like just basic road infrastructure? Is that the concept?
Exactly. So how do we
That's awesome.
remain, strategically predictable, operationally unpredictable? And
Mm.
so we don't want to be easy targets for any adversaries. And many cases of that. Many cases are adopting, vertical takeoff and landing technologies to be runway independent. And so you're seeing a variety of those adaptations of technology for potential future conflicts. And really, the goal is to deter those conflicts, not to engage in them. But if we fail to adopt and incorporate that, then there's a higher likelihood of adversaries being emboldened and taking aggressive behavior.
You're not going to quote history stuff the whole cycle here, but I got one more anecdote that kind of cues up a concept. Um,
Absolutely.
and I'm sure the facts I have are wrong, but I watch all these nerdy documentaries. The data point I had seen was that the U.S. had the 18th most powerful military in the world at the
Hmm.
precipice of World War II. So
Wow.
by the end of World War II, number one, but there was a ramp up. And
Yeah.
FDR, while he was campaigning on this concept that no Americans will go to Europe, he was
Hmm.
secretly meeting with DuPont and all the other folks, Ford,
Yeah.
who were titans of industry, and having them convert their commercial industrial complex over to military purposes. That was happening for a
Yeah.
year while he was getting elected, and it was kind of this
Hmm.
secret campaign. Um, it takes time, right? The moral of the story was like it took Ford. They were producing bombers in World War II,
Yeah.
not a thing everyone knows.
Hmm.
And it took a long time to retool and get the assembly line going. It's not an overnight pivot. We don't just suddenly have a military
Sure.
capability. How do we think about? I know you guys are way ahead of it. The government military complex is in a totally different league than it was in World War II. Do
Hmm.
we? Are there different channels now for production because we have private sector companies where it's not like we're going to go to a Ford? Do you know what I mean? Or are these
Yeah.
companies? If we get into some scaled conflict, should the private sector be thinking, "Hey, we might need to retool for a time of need and then go back to business later," or is that like just a thing of the past?
I don't think it's a thing of the past. I think there's a lot of companies that engage in dual use technology, right? And that's to the benefit of our nation. So, um, one of the things that we've seen with the Ukraine conflict, the Russian aggression and invasion of Ukraine, is it has stressed many countries' industrial bases, and so we see a recent national defense industrial strategy being released and an emphasis on making sure we're securing access to all those key inputs to it and increasing production. One recent example is the opening of a production line for ammunition 155 rounds out of Scranton, Pennsylvania. So, and then a brand new facility out of Mesquite, Texas. So, what we're seeing is a stress on the system. And I
Mm.
think what's a little bit different is a lot of our technology nowadays is reliant on software. So it's not as simple as can I just simply produce this particular system, but cannot keep up with all of the software development, the fusion of information, the architecture that goes behind it. So, we're seeing the U.S. adapt to that. I've seen military organizations that are now, reliant on software development. Some of it is very simple. One example that comes to mind was General Harigian when he was the commander of forces in the Middle East, Air Forces. He relied on Defense Innovation Unit to come in there and do software applications for their air tanking schedule. So all done via whiteboards at the time, but that resulted in a lot of inefficiencies, tankers launching when they didn't need to launch, and a lot of manual calculations. But simple things like that, how do we, adapt, use more automation? Not necessarily full up artificial intelligence, although that is required, but simple techniques like data analytics and then how do we train our forces to actually use those things and then protect from a cyber perspective as well. So,
Okay,
so I think to your, go ahead.
So for just putting this for the private sector audience that's going to be consuming, right?
Yeah.
There is a call to duty that's happened in the past where people kind of retool and repurpose. That could happen. Yeah. For people who are out there now with technology that they think might be relevant, what's the way to interface with the military? How does someone who's an engineer in a garage or someone in a division of a major company who thinks they have something that you guys should be looking at, how do they get that in?
Yeah, so the military does push out requests for proposals. So through our acquisition arms, each service has their own acquisition arm. It is publicly available information. But the military is trying to make it more easy as well. So there are organizations out there that are specifically designed for speed. The one example I alluded to was Defense Innovation Unit. So this particular organization reports directly to Secretary Austin. The director is Doug Beck, and they are looking at how do we move from an idea to contract within a 90-day period. So very unusual. But it's usually using commercial off-the-shelf technology. So a lot of times you can go onto a website and you can put in information. It's vetted, of course. So we certainly don't want companies that aren't truly trying to benefit the military. But in a lot of cases, it's companies that have a technology that may not understand the application. And so through this website, they're able to basically see how it can be applied in some cases. And in many cases, it's a contract within about a 90-day period and then a prototype within about 9 months. And then from there, determining if those prototypes are worth going into production. So a variety of methods, and we're seeing a lot of commercial applications, especially as we get into more reliance on computing and artificial intelligence. There's a lot of companies that are doing this on the commercial side, and they're on the leading edge in many cases.
Do you know the website offhand, or how does someone find this? We can put it in the show notes after too.
Yeah, I'll track it down for you and give you that information. I don't have it handy.
Okay,
but that's one for more rapid. Yeah.
Yep, below the pod, because a lot of startup techie people listen to this, and maybe they'll get to the right hands. There'll be a match.
Absolutely.
You talked about pressure on the supply chain. In startup land, pressure's good, right? We like a little pressure. No pressure, you don't build, you don't refine. Too much pressure, you break.
Yeah.
So how do you guys view this pressure? Is it helping to build out infrastructure and systems, and it's kind of like making the bones stronger?
I think it is. Yeah, I think there's, in some cases, I think it's, misinformation or reluctance. So, I think some commercial entities, don't want to be associated with the military at all because, they think by doing that, I am promoting war. Couldn't be farther from the truth. No military individual, especially those that have engaged in combat operations, seek war. I mean, we seek deterrence. We seek to avoid war. And so that's probably the biggest takeaway is hey, you can help your nation actually avoid war, through a lot of these technologies. And a lot of it's not lethal means. It's how do we just process information more quickly? How do we get information to decision makers in a rapid fashion? So there's no lethal application to it. The CHIPS Defense Act, all of those things to increase production capability within the U.S. for those type of, those activities, those products that are sensitive in nature. We don't want offshore, and we don't want to rely on foreign supply chains. I think are really key. And then also our acquisition arms are looking at, hey, in some cases, maybe our closest allies can do co-production with us. It's a lengthy process, but that means they were truly sharing technologies and research and development. And we do a lot of agreements on a daily basis with our allies and partners for that. But I would say, don't be reluctant. There are ways to navigate, the bureaucracy, just like there is with anything. The military has bureaucracy, but then so does the commercial side. But the response there is, entities like Defense Innovation Unit and others are trying to fast track that. And there's a lot of cases. AFWorks is another example on the Air Force side that tries to incorporate small businesses, and then ultimately, determine if their prototypes can be applied to a problem set. So don't be concerned. Engage with people, and but ultimately, we're seeking to avoid conflict if possible.
That's a very powerful concept. I know this has been, I think, an ethos sticking point for a lot of the tech industry. Is the ethics of military equipment. Yeah. Palmer Luckey at Anduril has been kind of championing this concept that a stronger military actually reduces conflict. His point is that war happens when both parties think they have a shot at winning, right? Yeah. If it's completely asymmetric, then you avoid it altogether. Does that resonate with you as a
absolutely
strategist?
I agree completely. Yeah, I mean, those miscalculations occur when adversaries think that like you said, they have a shot at winning, or no one's going to get involved, right? So probably one recent example of that is you see the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The U.S. I think did an admirable job of disclosing sensitive information. So policy decision to declassify information and show, hey, Russians are massing on the border there, and these are their intentions. The fact that he met with Xi Jinping in 2022 in Beijing regarding this particular topic. I mean, all of these things were designed to basically show the public that, hey, this is nefarious and aggressive behavior. But companies like Anduril and others, and certainly we make no endorsement of any particular company, but they understand that working with the military has value. There's been a lot of small companies that I've seen as I've kind of done research that have military applications, but also commercial ones. In my current position, I'm in U.S. Southern Command. Laura Richardson is our commander here, and she's very tolerant of risk and new technologies, and using this theater as a test bed for anything that's emerging. In this particular command, we've been using sail drones for many years. So these sail drones, they loiter on the ocean using solar power, using wind power for up to a year at a time. They can help with climate change, monitor the ocean, but they also help us to monitor illegal fishing, which are kind of the economy for many of the countries in the region. They help us to determine if there's migration patterns that we need to be concerned about. Hey, do we need to go intercept migrants on the ocean that are at risk of sinking? So the Coast Guard relies on that information, and then just elicit activities. But that's one example of a commercial technology that has practical military applications. Interestingly enough, sail drones, one of them at least, sailed through a hurricane. So I think it was Hurricane Sam in 2021. 126 mile hour winds, 100-foot waves, and it came out on the other end. So clearly the technology is impressive. But one example of commercial technology that helps the military, but also has scientific applications, commercial applications as well.
So you talked about Ukraine, framing this in the technology evolution of the military, right? We've had a period of relative peace for the last 50 odd years. There's been conflicts. How important, and I know this is putting politics aside, obviously no one wants conflict. So kind of dehumanizing this for a minute if we can. How
Yeah.
important from a learning perspective is it to have these ongoing conflicts to see what technologies are becoming less relevant, more important? How much are we learning from all of
Yeah.
the bad activity that's happening right now?
Yeah. So, Mark, none of us want to actually learn from real conflict if we can avoid it. So we'd rather war game it. We do exercises and we do those things, those activities all the time. So we red team things, we do simulations with the intent to generate lessons learned without actually engaging in combat operations. But inevitably, conflict is something that's inevitable. We seek to avoid it, but the nature of humanity is that people will rely on their honor, fear, and interests, and there'll be periods of peace, but we need to do our best to avert that conflict. So I think Ukraine has a lot of lessons learned from my personal opinion. In my current position, I don't deal with Ukraine, but in previous positions I have. And so, speaking from that experience, I would say we need to, first of all, acknowledge that not all lessons from Ukraine can be applied to the U.S. Not all lessons from Ukraine will apply to a large conflict between a near peer or adversary. However, I think many people have discounted a lot of those lessons learned from Ukraine. I think we need to learn from them. There are many lessons. To me, the glaring one is the will to win. Any country that is fighting for national survival is going to be in for the long haul and has absolute staying power. So all the predictions that Ukraine was going, that conflict was going to last days and hours, we're a couple years into the war, and it's not slowing. I did host a Ukrainian band member at my house I guess it's been a couple years now, and some members of Ukraine. So the U.S. band and the Ukrainian band would do concerts together, and so even in the time of conflict, we try to do something similar. And I talked to him, and he said for the first time he felt safe in many, many months. And so that human aspect to it. There are people, unlike you and I, sitting in the comfort of our homes or hotel rooms, that are facing death experiences every day. And so the human will to fight, I think, is one key takeaway. The other one is air superiority. So General Hecker, the commander of air forces in Europe and Africa, has talked extensively about this. That neither side, Ukraine nor that Russia, has gained air superiority. So there's more of a strategy of air denial. Hasn't worked well for either side. So it underscores the importance for our military and our allies to seek air superiority to protect our forces, to gain that freedom of maneuver. Commercial technology. So as you talked about this, a lot of commercial companies have come to the assistance of Ukraine, or they're relying on products that are dual use. So commercial imagery, I think, is one example. It's readily available. You're able to tip and cue using a lot of these things. There have been open source reports of companies that have been able to adapt. So I read one news article that Ukraine was jammed by Russia, and within 24 hours they were able to do a software update and overcome that jamming. So if true, that shows the resiliency of some of the commercial entities out there. Social media is one aspect. Everyone's got a cell phone nowadays. It shows where there's aggressive behavior. It can also be used as sensing items. So General Ecker relayed how a lot of cell phones are put on cell towers, and that actually serves as an indication of early warning for people to take refuge in that particular conflict. There's so many examples.
How about drones? I feel like the drone story is the one that's making it to the mainstream media.
I think that's a significant one. That it's really the use of these small UAVs, right? And many of them are truly drones, right? Autonomous versus remotely piloted. So you're seeing drone on drone aerial engagements. Very sophisticated. No one can truly hide on that battlefield. And so you talked about your initial example there. I mean, not everyone's adapted to that. And so people hiding in
Mm.
trenches, essentially in trench warfare, and yet these drones can overfly and locate and work in pairs and swarms to be able to overcome that. So I think the autonomy there is really important. The other thing is the ability to operate in a GPS environment. So it's a high jamming environment, high GPS jamming environment, and so whatever technologies we adopt, we have to be able to overcome that. Whether it's using some kind of alternate system, electro-optical, you're looking at magnetic navigation in some cases, but a lot of these manufacturers are able to figure out ways around it and to overcome that jamming. And so I think that's another great lesson from this particular conflict.
Are there particular assets that it seems like are becoming insignificant in the new tech landscape? One that on the outside
Mm-hmm.
comes to mind. I don't know if this has any bearing to it. At
Mm-hmm.
some point, like an aircraft carrier, right, moves planes closer to the target. I'm sure there's other functions.
Yeah.
If the planes can fly around the world and do laps, which I'm not saying they can do that yet, how much do you need an aircraft carrier, right? So
Yeah.
there's a sunsetting concept as other capabilities get built out,
Yeah.
short-term solutions. Anything kind of going by the wayside right now?
Yeah. So, I had the opportunity to go out on an aircraft carrier here a couple months back. So there was one transiting back the USS George Washington. I mean, truly amazing. So as an Air Force person, staying there on the deck, watching F-18s take off and land,
It's amazing.
F-35. I mean, the ability to project power, I think, it maintains its relevance there. Certainly,
Hmm.
people are conducting studies on, hey, in a large scale conflict, how detectable is it? But we're not in a large scale conflict 99% of the time. And so some of these systems that some would argue are no longer applicable or, they're easy to target, can be used, and they're used to deter conflict. Anytime there's a flare up, we're seeing yet another one in the Middle East. Aircraft carriers go there and are able to project power. But I think there are probably ways to protect our assets that are not revealed to the average person for good reason, and so they may not
Hmm.
be as susceptible as everyone expects them to be.
Hmm.
But I'm not saying but it certainly requires adaptation, right? Any kind of large, and that's why I think you're seeing, autonomy on carriers with air refueling to extend the range of all those aircraft. So a carrier can remain outside of the range of some missile systems, may not be able to remain outside the range of every missile system. But we're thinking about that. So I'd be reluctant to say that certain things are not applicable in the current environment. Sometimes we use old things in new ways.
Right.
We rode on a horseback in 2001 into Afghanistan. That is a old use of
Right.
technology to combat a threat against our homeland. So I think creative uses of what exists currently is another way to look at it.
So you mentioned jamming before. Space Force is one of
Yeah.
the things that I think in the public eye gets a little bit of an eye roll.
Hmm.
People aren't sure of whether or not it has military significance or it's kind of a science project.
Yeah,
Um, I'm under the impression that it's actually strategically incredibly important.
it is.
Can I just get a quick, high level on how that fits in the world and how important Space Force is?
Yeah. And space, space activities in the Space Force is critical. So it's our newest service. So came into being in December of 2019. I'm my service is Air Force, but in my last job, especially, I supported Space Force efforts and Air Force efforts. So I probably got little bit more knowledge of the Space Force and space capabilities than the average person. Also, my background, I've worked closely with Guardians, right, for combat operations, and so I would say it's absolutely essential to as a separate breakout service, I think you're paying, more attention to it. You're realizing that the threat is out there, and how do we, concentrate on that threat? And so you see the service chiefs all work together. Now, in addition to the Space Force, you also have the Space Command, right? So, Space Force commanded by General Chance Saltzman, and then the Space Command, so the combatant version of that, not the force providers, but the combatant version by General Whiting. But without
What does that
Space
mean?
Force, so essentially, think of Space Force as the force provider. So they are developing the capabilities, the future concepts, and training people. But they're doing a lot more than that. Space Command is essentially in charge of the warfighting component. So how do we think about this in contested environments? Both work hand in hand, and those people will transfer in between Space Force and Space Command.
Got it.
So really seamless on that aspect. General Whiting recently traveled into this theater of operations. So recently visited with leaders in Colombia and Argentina. He just signed an agreement with Uruguay on space situational awareness. So what you're seeing is operationalizing of information sharing, those type of things. But Mark, if you think about, hey, how did we get to where we're at today? Did we use GPS in some fashion? How do we tell the time on our watches? Everything relies on that precision navigation and timing that PNT or that, from GPS satellites. And so
Right.
it affects our banking systems. It affects, if you took an Uber or a Lyft or some kind of ride sharing program, you relied on GPS. And so how do we defend against those countries that are actively developing anti-satellite capabilities and have the intent and the capability to do so? And I think that's one of the reasons why the Space Force became its own service, is to really kind of fine tune and focus on those threats, which ultimately protects our economy and the world economy.
Yeah, it's just I think people don't see how integrated orbit is now with
Mm-hmm.
terrestrial life, even though they know that their phones are plugged into certain things and connected in certain ways. I think it's kind of out of sight,
I'm
out of mind.
I'm guilty of it too. We take it for granted, and so if my iPhone doesn't work, why is that? So if it's been a while. Interestingly, when I was flying F-16s back in the day, uh, the first version did not have GPS, and so I would rely on clock to map to ground. I would do visual updates
Mm,
on a dam or a point. Nowadays, I think it's very easy to get relying on GPS. It's going to tell me exactly where I'm at. That may not be
right.
the case in a contested environment. So how do we have alternate navigation systems, alternate methods to overcome that? And I think we're doing that. The next generation of GPS satellites are jam resistant. So there's 10 satellites that are 8 times more jam resistant. There's another batch of 22 under the GPS 3 Foxtrot that will be 60 times more jam resistant. So there are ways to improve that resilience, but we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket and think through. We
Right.
have to anticipate those changes before they occur.
The last topic here. Thank you for running through all this. But looking forward, I'm looking at the next innovation spike
Mm-hmm.
and the ecosystem that is warming up and getting very real is not just AI, it's humanoid robotics. And humanoid robotics are a huge unlock, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've always framed robotics as a point solution, right? You need a coffee. There's a thing that's designed specifically to make coffees.
Yeah.
But if you make a humanoid robot, they can interface with the entire world the way it is because the world was built for humans. So they
Mm-hmm.
are puzzle piece fit to kind of API into the current system.
Mm.
It feels like it's not here right now,
Yeah.
but we're investors in companies that are so close and moving so fast. A lot of people think humanoid robots are going to be in the assembly line and integrating into our society by the end of this decade. So it is happening fast.
Yeah.
Is that on the radar for folks in the military yet? Do some of these robot companies need to dial your hotline?
Well, I don't own
Where
the
are we at?
hotline, so if you call me, I may not be able to. But I think Yes to all the above. I think we need to approach all of these things with an open mind. And we also need to be cautious of, hey, what's the limitations of some of those technologies? They're going to continue to
Yeah.
exponentially mature and develop. Artificial intelligence, today is going to be very different from artificial intelligence a year from now. So, as you brought that topic up first, the military wants to adopt artificial intelligence for good
Mm.
reason. Now we have to do that in a responsible way, right? So at the highest levels, the military is educating senior leaders. How do we do this in a responsible fashion? How do we do it where it's traceable, where it's predictable,
Right.
whether it's equitable and it's governable? So all of these principles, oversee and shape those efforts. In May, our Secretary of the Air Force, the Honorable Frank Kendall, rode on an F-16 or flew on the backseat of an F-16 out at Edwards Air Force Base, one that had artificial intelligence. So he was with an instructor that could override it. But clearly, his message to the masses was, we need to adapt this, and there's great risk if we don't adapt it. Our adversaries are investing heavily in artificial intelligence,
Hmm.
and we want to make sure that we do it in a manner that's truly responsible. And so we've been doing this for many years. Artificial intelligence has been around. We've used it or it's more really automation, I would say, tipping and queuing. There's a missile launch somewhere that's going to alert a satellite that, hey, there was a plume there. It'll tip and queue other sensors. And that way we can more readily determine, hey, what was that plume from? And then characterize its trajectory, right? Do we need to intercept this or not? Maybe it's not going to go in a nefarious location. Maybe it's a test. So I think, you know, from that perspective, it's incredibly important. Um, as far as robots go, I don't think they're ever going to truly replace, uh, humans. I mean, I think, warfare is a human endeavor, but, we're kidding ourselves if we're not able to adapt technologies. And it brings up a lot of ethical and moral arguments, which I will not get into here. But I'm a fan of artificial intelligence. I recall many many years ago being on a final attack run-in. Friendly forces were under fire. They had pointed out a particular person that was supposedly firing on friendlies, and it was at a specific compound. So as I was able to kind of zoom in and figure out, okay, I've got this particular target, person carrying RPG in traditional Middle Eastern garb. But something was not quite right. This person was 45 degrees off of where they should have been, not facing directly towards friendlies. And something in the back of my mind just didn't feel right. So then queried, the tactical area controller and said, hey, they're not facing directly at friendlies. It does not appear that, this may not be the target. And then I got to stand by, and sure enough, it was indigenous special forces. An example of, we're building out algorithms, we're developing technologies, but ultimately a human's going to make a decision based on all the information available. We can't stop that advancement, but through better application of technologies, we can prevent tragic situations, and we can figure out that, hey, based on point of origin or what where this person was, or using beacons on every friendly force. I mean, technology can help us engage in warfare and be more precise. So I'm a huge fan of it. I don't know that much about humanoid robots, Mark, but I see all other aspects, and that's probably no different. And your point about, hey, it's easily adaptable, because our society, I think, all makes sense to me. But
Mm.
clearly, I was at a conference last week. I saw a robot dog walking by me. So they're clearly advancing
Right.
very
Those are
quickly.
becoming cost effective. A
Yeah,
thousand
I didn't
bucks or
play
something
fetch
on
with it.
Amazon now. It's crazy.
Get your own dog, I guess, easy to care and feed for. But I think
Well,
we need to
I
adapt.
just want to say, yeah, no, and thank you I appreciate the adaptation point. Glad to hear everyone is being appropriately, as expected, thoughtful about the AI. I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger made a good movie, but an unlikely scenario, I think, of how this all could go wrong. But, there needs to be adults in the room who are real serious about this, which it sounds like you guys obviously are.
Absolutely.
There's the popular tech community gets a little freaked out sometimes that this stuff can get out of hand. Because we see what it can do.
I think that's where the dialogue, right, and that's where the understanding between tech industry, military leaders, public policy experts. I mean, that conversation needs to be had, and in some cases, we need to understand each other a little bit better. But ultimately, the goal is to deter conflict. We don't, those that have engaged in conflict do not want conflict. But if we cannot, like you said, convince someone that they're not going to win, then they're more likely to engage in that aggressive behavior. So,
Ghost, I'll let you have the final word here. You're speaking to startup executives, tech entrepreneurs, tech executives, kind of people who are trying to build innovation. Any message you want them to hear? What can they be doing to help?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is don't be afraid to engage military leaders, or anyone in the military aspect of society, because ultimately I think we need to work together. Industry, tech has saved many, many thousands of lives. We see that in the current conflict in Ukraine playing out, and we see it in others. But ultimately, the more we can work together, it's better for all. And in many cases, it's not simply for a military application. If you look at the origins of the internet with the predecessor to DARPA, I mean, that's kind of how we got the internet. And so had tech been afraid to work with the military and vice versa, we wouldn't have made the advancements that we do today. So I think that's the biggest takeaway. And ultimately, this is a human endeavor. So technology is one tool. There are many aspects. How do we adapt it? How do we, make responsible policies to incorporate that? And then, ultimately the training. We're doing all of that in this hemisphere. General Richardson has, been very adamant about team democracy and promoting the rule of law, and technology is one tool to do that. But working in close contact with our allies and partners across the region is key to promoting that. So I look forward to the partnership, and please, if I see you at a trade show or conference, please come up and talk to me. I look forward to that dialogue.
Thank you for being on.
Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate the time.
Huge thank you to Ghost for being on. It's always fun chatting with him. Terrific guy. And it's really encouraging as a private citizen, probably, who's reading too much in the way of the modern news cycle where everything seems so scary, to meet people who are paying attention, who are sophisticated, and running a thoughtful operation to provide security. So it's very, very grateful for the service and the work these folks do. So anyway, thank you for listening. We'll catch you soon.